Live now. Was this the volume? Be a bit quieter. Actually, have bed. Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. Go to table of contents. Damn, that zoomed right in. The greatest danger to the state is independent intellectual criticism. That, I'm gonna be honest, Rothbard, that's wankery. The biggest danger to the state. Yeah, okay. It depends what you mean by the state here. Do you mean, like, specific instances of the state existing, or do you mean something else? Contents. State is not what the state is, how the state preserves itself, how the state transcends its limits, what the state fears, how states relate to one another, history as a race between state power and social power in the index. This isn't a terribly long thing. It might be like an important thing to read, I don't know. And look, it's big text. Alright, boys. Turn this up because I'm not actually that loud. Tip. The state, almost universally considered an institution of social service. Some theorists venerate the state as the apotheosis of society. Okay, Google, what does apotheosis mean? The highest point in the development of something. That's nice. I'm glad that works. Also, it's formatted weirdly because I don't have it capture the whole thing. And this is fairly right offset. So when I Google something, it's going to show up here. Anyway. Others regard it as an amiable, though often inefficient, organization for achieving social ends. But almost all regard it as a necessary means for achieving the goals of mankind, a means to be ranged against the private sector, and often winning in this competition of resources. With the rise of democracy, the identification of the state with society has been redoubled, until it is common to hear sentiments expressed which violate virtually every tenet of reason and such as and egalitarianism as a result against nature and other sentiments violate virtually every tenet, reason, and common sense. We are the government. Oh yeah. The useful collective term we has enabled an ideological camouflage to be thrown over the reality of politics. If we are the government, then anything a government does to an individual is not only just and untyrannical, but also voluntary on the part of the individual concerned. If the government has incurred a huge public debt, which must be paid by taxing one group for the benefit of another, this reality of burden is obscured by saying that we owe it to ourselves. If the government conscripts a man or throws him into jail for dissident opinion, then he is doing it to himself, and therefore nothing untoward has occurred. Under this reasoning, any Jews murdered by the Nazi government were not murdered. Instead, they must have committed suicide. They were the government. It was democratically chosen. And, therefore, anything the government did to them was voluntary on their part. One would not think it necessary to belabor this point, and yet the overwhelming bulk of the people hold this fallacy to a greater or lesser degree. We must therefore emphasize that we are not the government. The government is not us. The government does not, in any accurate sense, represent the majority of people. Cannot, in this chapter, develop the many problems and fallacies of democracy. Suffice it to say that an individual's true agent or representative is always subject to that individual's orders. And wait, suffice it to say here that an individual's true agent or representative is subject to that individual be dismissed at any time and cannot act contrary to the interests and wishes of his principal. Clearly, the representative in democracy can never fulfill such agency functions. The only ones a libertarian society. Okay. But government does not in any sense represent the majority of people, but even if it did, even if 70% of the people decided to murder the remaining 30%, this would still be murder and not be voluntary suicide on the part of the minority. No organicist metaphor, no irrelevant bromide that we are all part of one another must be permitted to obscure this basic fact. Okay, so Social Democrats often retort that democracy, majority choice of rulers, logically implies that the majority must leave certain freedoms to the minority. Minority might one day become the majority. Apart from other flaws, this argument obviously does not hold where the minority cannot become the majority. For example, when the minority is of a different racial or ethnic group from the majority. If then the state is not us, if it is not the human family getting together to decide mutual problems, if it is not a lodge meeting or country club, what is it? Briefly, state is that organization in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly of the force and violence in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only organization in society that obtains its revenue not by voluntary contribution, payment, or services rendered, but by coercion. While other individuals or institutions obtain their income by production of goods and services and by the peaceful voluntary sale of these goods and services to others, the state obtains its revenue by the use of compulsion, that is, by the use and the threat of the jailhouse and the bayonet. Having used force and violence to obtain its revenue, the state generally goes on to regulate and dictate the other action of its individual subject. One would think that simple observation of all states through history and over the globe would be proof enough of the system. But the miasma of myth leans so long over state activity that elaboration is necessary. Let's... Sounding... My glasses are smudged. What's going on here? What the state is. Let's go. Let's find out what the state is. Man is born naked into the world and needing to use his mind to learn how to take the resources given him by nature and to transform them, for example by investment in capital, into shapes and forms and places where the resources can be used for the satisfactions of his wants and the advancement of his standard of living. It is fascinating how much libertarian philosophy, they refer to these things, standard of living, property values, and it's all like, it sounds abstract, but like, what they mean is how nice things are. You know? Like, yeah. The only way by which man can do this is by the use of his mind and energy to transform resources, production, and to exchange these products for products created by others. Man has found that, through the process of voluntary mutual exchange, the productivity and hence living standards of all participants in exchange may increase enormously. Only natural course for man to survive. The only natural course for man to survive and to attain wealth, therefore, is by using his mind and energy to engage in the production and exchange process. He does this first by finding natural resources and by transforming them, by mixing his labor with them, make them his individual property, and then by exchanging this property with similarly obtained property of others. The social path dictated by the requirements of man's nature, therefore, is the path of property rights and the free market of gift or exchange of such rights. Through this path, men have learned how to avoid the jungle methods, fighting over scarce resources so that A can only acquire them at the expense of B, and instead to multiply those resources enormously in peaceful and harmonious production and exchange. The great German sociologist Franz Oppenheimer pointed out that there are two mutually exclusive ways of acquiring wealth. One, the above way of production and exchange, he called economic means. The other way is simpler, in that it does not require productivity. It is the way of seizure of another's goods or services by the use of force and violence. This is too much. Let's actually zoom in slightly more. Yeah, that's gonna make things a bit easier for anyone reading along. This is the method which Oppenheimer termed the political means of wealth. It should be clear that the peaceful use of reason and energy in production is the natural path for man, the means for his survival and prosperity on this earth. It should be equally clear that the coercive, exploitative means is contrary to natural law. It is parasitic, for instead of adding to production, it subtracts from it. The political means siphons off. Ooh, got a bot. Be gone for 12 days. How about that? The political means siphons production off to a parasitic and destructive individual, and this siphoning not only subtracts from the number producing, but also lowers the producer's incentive to produce beyond his own subsistence. In the long run, the robber destroys his own subsistence by dwindling or eliminating the source of his own supply. Not only that, even in the short run, the predator is acting contrary to his own true nature as a man. We are now in a position to answer more fully the question, what is the state? The state, in the words of Oppenheimer, is the organization of the political means. It is the systematization of the predatory process over a given territory. Crime, at best, is sporadic and uncertain. The parasitism is ephemeral, and the coercive parasitic lifeline may be cut off at any time by the resistance of the victim. Ooh, I'm not gonna read all that. That sounds like it's just going over something being said. The state provides a legal, orderly, systematic channel for the predation of private property. It renders certain, secure, and relatively peaceful lifeline of the parasitic caste in society. Since production must always precede predation, the free market is anterior to the... I'm gonna make sure I know what this word means. Coming before in time, early. Okay. The state has never been created by a social contract. It has always been born in conquest and exploitation. The classic paradigm was a conquering tribe pausing in its time-honored method of and murdering a conquered tribe, realized that the time span of plunder longer and more secure, and the situation more pleasant if the conquered tribe were allowed to live and produce. Conquerors settling among them as rulers, exacting a steady annual tribute. Albert J. Nock wrote vividly that state claims and exercises the monopoly of crime. It forbids private murder, but itself organizes murder on a colossal scale, punishes private theft, but itself lays unscrupulous hands on anything it wants, whether the property of citizen or of alien. The right thing, another essay. Ah, man. That sounds fun. Let's copy that into the things to read document. Right at the bottom. Knock on, so it's knock. On doing the right thing, other essays. Sounds fun. One method of the birth of a state. Oppenheimer of the state. What then is the state as a sociological concept? State, completely in its genesis, is a social institution by a victorious group of men defeated with the sole purpose of regulating the dominion of the victorious group of men on a defeated group, and securing itself against revolt from within and attacks from abroad. Teleologically, this domination had no other purpose than the economic exploitation of the vanquished by the victors. Teleology is... There's a lot in apologetics circles. Purpose or design, right. And De Juvenal has written, the state is in essence the result of the successes achieved by a band of brigands who superimpose themselves on small distinct societies. Bertrand de Juvenal on power. Okay. Going back up. One method of the birth of a state may be illustrated as follows. In the hills of southern Ruritania, a bandit group manages to obtain physical control over the territory. And finally, the bandit chieftain proclaims himself king of the sovereign and independent government of South Ruritania. And if he and his men have the force to maintain this rule for a while, lo and behold, a new state has joined of nations, and the former bandit leaders have been transformed into the lawful nobility of the realm. How the state preserves itself. Let's go. Once a state has been established, the problem of the past, how to maintain their rule. While force is their modus operandi, their basic and long-run problem is ideological. For in order to continue in office, any government, not simply a democratic government, must have the support of the majority of itself. This support, it must be noted, need not be active enthusiasm. It may well be passive resignation, as if to an inevitable support in the sense of acceptance of some sort must be, else the minority of state rulers would eventually be outweighed by the active resistance of the majority of the public. Crucial distinction between caste, a group with privileges or burdens coercively granted or imposed, and the Marxian concept of class in society. Okay, let's add stuff. We're adding more stuff. Ludwig von Mises, Theory and History. It might already be on the list. We love adding stuff to the list of things I might read. I mean, I'm getting through them. This was a thing that I learned about while reading. Since predation must be supported out of the surplus of production, it is necessarily true that the class constituting the state, full-time bureaucracy, ability, must be a rather small minority in the land, though it may, of course, purchase allies among important groups of the population. Therefore, the chief task of the rulers is always to secure the active or resigned acceptance of the majority of the citizens. Such acceptance does not, of course, imply that the state has become voluntary, even if the majority support the active and eager. This support is not unanimous by every individual. That every government, no matter how dictatorial over individuals, must secure such support has been demonstrated by such acute political theorists such as Etienne de la Boétie, David Hume, and Ludwig von Mises. Thus, cf. David Hume, of the first principles of government in Essays Literary, Moral and Political. Lord Locke and Taylor. Etienne Boétie, Anti-Dictator. Ludwig von Mises, Human Action. That's on the list. And then Against the Tyrant. That sounds fun. Get the Oscar Jesse and John D. Lewis. Of course, one method of securing support is the creation of vested economic interests. Therefore, the king alone cannot rule. He must have a sizable group of followers who enjoy the prerequisites of rule. For example, the members of the state apparatus, such as the full-time bureaucracy. Right. But this still secures only a minority of eager supporters, and even the essential purchasing of support by subsidies and other grants of privilege still does not obtain the consent of the majority. This essential acceptance, the majority must be persuaded by ideology that their government is good, wise, and at least inevitable, and certainly better than other conceivable alternatives. Promoting this ideology among the people is the vital social task of intellectuals. The masses of men do not create their own ideas, or indeed think through these ideas independently. They follow passively the ideas adopted and disseminated by the body of intellectuals. The intellectuals are, therefore, the opinion molders in society, and since it is precisely a molding of opinion that the state most desperately needs, the basis for age-old alliance between the state and the intellectuals becomes clear. Very high up. Whenever a ruler makes himself dictator, all those who are corrupted by burning ambition or extraordinary avarice, these gather around him and support him in order to have a share in the booty and to constitute themselves petty chiefs of the big tyrant. Valid. It is evident that the state needs the intellectual. is not so evident why intellectuals state. Put simply, we may state that the intellectual's livelihood in the free market is never too secure. The intellectual must depend on the values and choices of the masses of his fellow men, and it is precisely characteristic of the masses that they are generally uninterested in. The state, on the other hand, is willing to offer the intellectuals a secure and permanent berth in the state apparatus, and thus a secure income and the panoply of prestige. For the intellectuals will be handsomely rewarded the important function they perform for state rulers, of which group they now become a part. This by no means implies that all intellectuals ally themselves with the state. On aspects of the alliance of intellectuals and the state, cf. Bertrand de Juvenal, The Attitude of the Intellectuals in Market Society. Treatment of capitalism by continental intellectuals. Capitalism and the historians. The intellectuals, and imperialism and social classes. Fascinating. I'm not going to read those right away. If they're interesting, I'll probably see them linked somewhere else in a context that gives me an idea of what's in them. The alliance between the state and the intellectuals was symbolized in the eager desire of professors at the University of Berlin in the 19th century to form the intellectual bodyguard of the House of Hohenzollern. In the present day, let us note the revealing comment of an eminent Marxist scholar concerning Professor Wittvogel's critical study of ancient Oriental despotism. The civilization which Professor Wittfogel is so bitterly attacking was one which could make poets and scholars into... Oh yeah, that's funny. Joseph Needham, Review of Carl A. Wittfogel, Oriental Despotism, Science and Society. Needham also writes that the successive Chinese emperors were served in all ages by a great company of profoundly humane and disinterested scholars. Wittfogel notes the Confucian doctrine that the glory of the ruling class rested on its scholar bureaucrat officials destined to be professional dictating to the mass of the populace. Carl A. Wittfogel, Oriental Despotism. Attitude contrasting Needham's John Lucas, intellectual class or intellectual profession in the intellectuals. And I don't really want to go on the anti-intellectualism stuff. It's a bit of a drag. It makes it look dumb, even though it's not a dumb position to hold. Of innumerable examples, we may cite the recent development science of strategy in the service of the government's main violence wielding arm, the military. That's a bit much as well. Ooh. A venerable institution, furthermore, is the official court historian dedicated to purveying the rulers' views of their own and their predecessors' actions. Gian Rib's The War Plotters Operation. Strategists insist that their occupation deserves the dignity of the academic counterpart of the military profession. Also, Marcus Raskin, The Megadeth Intellectual. New York. That's a fun title. Thus, the historian Conya Reid, in a presidential address, advocated the suppression of historical fact in the service democratic and national values. Reed claimed that total war, whether it is hot or cold, enlists everyone and calls upon everyone to play his part. The historian is not freer from this obligation than social responsibilities of the historian, American Historical Review. For a critique of Reed and other aspects of court history, Howard K. Beale, the professional historian, his theory and practice, Historical Review. Also, C.F. Herbert Butterfield, Official History, Its Pitfalls and Criteria, Human Relations, New York, England. Okay. That's quite tempting. Fun sounding topic. I'm not going to deep dive into it though, because that's not my field. So we've just gone done. Yeah, we're making fun of court historians. Many and varied have been the arguments by which the state and its intellectuals have induced their subjects to their rule. Basically, the strands of argument may be summed up as follows. A. The state rulers are great and wise men. They rule by divine right. They are the aristocracy of men. They are the scientific experts. Much greater and wiser than the good, but rather... B. By the extant government is inevitable, absolutely necessary, and far better than the indescribable that would ensue upon its... The union of church and state was one of the oldest and most successful of these ideological devices. The ruler was either anointed by God or, in the case of the absolute gentle despots, was himself God. Hence, any resistance to his rule would be blasphemy. The state's priestcraft performed the basic intellectual function of gaining popular support and even worship for the rulers. Oriental despot, contrasting roles of religion vis state in Japan. You know what? That kind of sounds fun. Let's look at there's a lot written about this book. It's a large text. That mode. Hydraulic government. I'm on a tangent now. What a monopoly empire. Oh, okay. Yeah, because the river Yangtze. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but this river, probably. But also the other one, but important in this one. Yangtze. I don't know how to. Can I get a pronunciation on this? No. Yeah. No. Yangtze? Okay. Yangtze. Yangtze.
Yangtze.
Ah. Ah. Yangtze. No, that's sounds awful. What the? No. I'm rejecting that out of hand. Anyway. Another successful device was to instill fear of any alternative system of present rulers, it was maintained, supply to the citizens an essential service which they should be most grateful. Protection against sporadic criminals and marauders. For the state to preserve its own monopoly on predation did indeed that private and unsystematic crime was kept to a minimum. The state has always been jealous of its own preserve. Especially has the state been successful in recent centuries, instilling fear of other state rulers. Since the land area of the globe has been parceled out among particular states, one of the basic doctrines of the state was to identify itself with the territory it governed. Since most men tend to love their homeland, the identification of that land and its people with the state was a means of making natural patriotism work to the state's advantage. If Ruritania was being attacked by Moldavia, the first task of the state and its intellectuals was to convince the people of Ruritania that the attack was really upon them and not simply upon the caste. In this way, a war between was converted into a war with each people in defense of its rule in the erroneous belief that the rulers were defending them. This device of nationalism has only been successful in Western civilization in recent years. It was not too long ago that the mass of subjects regarded wars as irrelevant battles between various sets of nobles. This is why it's weird reading like Richard VIII play. Shakespeare the VIII, is it? Henry the Third. What's the one that go to war? Which one's got the Battle of Agincourt? Battle what? Henry V. Yeah. Anyway, it's really weird reading through Henry V, and it's like they are amped, like hell yeah, we want to go to war, and then like the next class, because I was in high school, you're hearing about, oh, here's what the world wars were like. And it doesn't make sense. You're like, wait, which one is it? Is war this a good thing? But I mean, if you're just getting paid a ton of money, to fight for the king for a little, yeah, it's kind of good. A good deal. Many and subtle are the ideological weapons fate has wielded through the century. One excellent weapon has been tradition. The longer that the rule of a state has been able to preserve itself, the more powerful this weapon. For then, the X dynasty, by state, has the seeming weight of centuries of tradition behind it. Worship of one's ancestors then becomes a none too subtle means of worship of one's ancient. The greatest danger to the state is independent intellectual criticism. There is no better way to stifle that criticism than to attack any isolated voice, any raiser of new doubts, as a profane violator of the wisdom of his ancestors. Another potent ideological force. Deprecate the individual and exalt the collectivity of society. Since any given rule implies majority acceptance, any ideological danger to that rule only start from one or a few thinking. The new idea, much less the new critical idea, must begin as a small minority opinion. Therefore, the state must nip the view in the bud by ridiculing any view that defies the opinion of the mass. Juvenile on power. I'm going to read that at some point, so I'm going to not. Seems fun, whatever you're saying. Listen only to your brothers, justice society, thus become ideological weapons, crushing individual decisions. On such use of the religion of China, see Jacobs. By such measures, the masses will never learn of the non-existent government. An original idea is potential change, and hence invasion of its prerogatives. The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out for him, without regard to the prevailing super and taboo. Most inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable, and so, if he is romantic, he tries to change it, and even if he is not romantic personally, is very apt to spread discontent among those who are. It is also important for the state to make its inevitable. Even if its reign is disliked, it will then be met with passive resignation, as witness a coupling of death and taxes. One method is to use historiographical as opposed to individual freedom of will. If the X dynasty rules us because the inexorable laws of history, or the divine will, or the absolute material productive, have so decreed, and nothing any puny individuals may do can change this. It is also important for the state to inculcate its subjects' aversion to any conspiracy theory of history. For a search for conspiracies means a search for motives and an attribution of responsibility for historical mistakes. If, however, any tyranny imposed by the state, or venality or aggressive war, was caused not by the state rulers, but by mysterious and arcane social forces, or by the imperfect state of the world, or if in some way everyone was, we are all murderers, proclaims once, then there is no point to becoming indignant or rising up against such mistakes. Furthermore, an attack on conspiracy theories means that these subjects will become more gullible in the general welfare reasons always put forth by the state for engaging in any of its despotic actions. A conspiracy theory can unsettle this by causing the public to doubt the state's ideological propaganda. Another tried and true method for bending subjects to the state's will is induced guilt. Any increase in private well-being can be attacked as unconscionable greed, imperialism, or excessive affluence. Profit-making can be attacked as exploitation and use mutually beneficial exchanges denounced as selfishness, and somehow with the conclusion always being drawn that more resources should be siphoned from the private the public sector. The induced guilt makes the public more ready to do just that, while individual persons tend to indulge in selfish greed. Failure of the state's rulers to engage in exchanges is supposed to signify their devotion to higher and nobler causes. Parasitic predation being inherently moral and aesthetically lofty as compared to peaceful and productive. In the present, more secular age, the divine right of the state has been supplemented by the invocation of a new god, science. State rule is now proclaimed as being ultra-scientific, as constituting planning by experts, while reason is in the essential, not the true reason of the individual and his exercise of free will. It is still collectivist and determined, still implying holistic aggregate and coercive manipulation of passive subjects by their rulers. The increasing use of scientific jargon has considered the state's intellectuals to obscurantist apologia for state rule that would have only met with derision by the populace of a simple age. A robber who justified his theft by saying that he really helped his victim by his spending giving a boost to retail trade find few converts. And this theory is clothed in Keynesian equations and expressive references to the multiplier effect. Fortunately, carries more, and so the assault on common sense proceeds. Each age performs the task in its. Thus, ideological support being vital to the state, it must unceasingly try to impress the public with its legitimacy, to distinguish its activities from those of mere brigands. The unremitting determination of its assaults on common sense is no accident, for, as Mencken vividly maintained, the average man, whatever his errors otherwise, at least sees clearly that government is something lying outside him and outside the generality of fellow men. That it is a separate, independent, and hostile power only partly under his control and capable of great harm. Is it a fact of no significance that robbing the government is everywhere regarded as a crime of less magnitude than robbing an individual, a corporation? What lies behind all this? What lies behind all this? A deep sense of fundamental antagonism between the government and the people it governs, apprehended not as a committee of citizens chosen to carry on the of the population, but as a separate and autonomous corporation mainly devoted to exploiting the population for the benefit of its own. When a private citizen is robbed, a worthy man is deprived of the country, and government is robbed. The worst that happens is that certain rogues and loafers have less money than had before. The notion that they have earned that money never entertained most sensible men. It would how the state transcends limits. Halfway through the book. Yeah, we can finish this book. Bertrand de Jouvenel has sagely pointed out, through the centuries, men have formed concepts. As Bertrand de Jouvenel have formed concepts designed to check and limit the exercise of state rule, and one after another, the state, using its intellectual allies, has been able to transform these concepts into intellectual rubber stamps of legitimacy and virtue attached to its decree action. Originally, in Western Europe, the concept of divine sovereignty held that the kings may rule only according to divine law. The kings turned the concept into rubber stamp of divine approval action. The concept of parliamentary democracy began as a popular check upon absolute monarchical. It ended with Parliament being an essential part of the state, and its every act totally sovereign. As de Juvenal concludes, many writers on theories of sovereignty have worked out one of the restricted devices, but in the end, every single such theory has, sooner or later, lost its original and come to act merely as a springboard to power by providing it with powerful aid of an invisible sovereign with whom it could in time successfully identify itself. It's like constitutionalism. It's supposed to act as a limit on power of government, but then it's constantly invoked as a justification for the extent of federal government. Similarly, with more specific doctrine, the natural rights of the individual enshrined in John Locke and the Bill of Rights became a statist right to a job. Utilitarianism turned from arguments for liberty to arguments against resisting the state's invasions of etc. Certainly, the most ambitious attempt was limits on the state has been the Bill of Rights. Other restrictive parts of the American there we go. In which written limits on government became the fundamental law to be interpreted by a judiciary supposedly independent of the other branches of. All Americans are familiar with the process by which the construction of limits in the Constitution has been inexorably broadened over the last century. But few have been as keen as Professor Charles Black to see that the state has, in the process, largely transformed judicial review itself from a limiting device, yet another instrument furnishing ideological legitimacy to the government's action. For if a judicial decree of unconstitutional is a mighty check to government power, implicit or explicit verdict of constitutional, a mighty weapon for fostering public acceptance of ever greater government power. Professor Black begins his analysis by pointing out the crucial necessity of legitimacy for any government to this legitimation signifying basic majority acceptance of the government and its actions. Acceptance of legitimacy becomes a particular problem in a country such as the States, where substantive limitations are built in the theory on which the government. What is needed, adds Black, is a means by which the government can assure the public that its increasing powers are indeed constitutional, and this, he can has been the major historic function of judicial review. Let Black illustrate the problem. Let me just... My eyes aren't working. I had a really bad headache this morning. Ugh. The supreme risk is that of disaffection, and a feeling of outrage widely disseminated throughout the population. Loss of moral authority by the government as, however long it may be propped up by force or inertia, the lack of an appealing and immediately available alternative. Almost everybody living under a government of limited powers must sooner or later be subjected to some governmental action as a matter of private opinion he regards as outside the power of government, positively forbidden to government. Man is drafted, though he finds nothing in the Constitution about being drafted. A farmer is told how much wheat to raise. He believes, and he discovers that some respectable lawyers believe with him, that the government has no more right to tell him how much wheat he can grow than it has to tell his daughter whom. A man goes to the federal penitentiary for saying what he wants to, and he paces his cell reciting, "Congress shall make no laws, freedom of speech." A businessman is told what he can ask and must ask for buttermilk. Oh, what he can ask and must ask for buttermilk. Right. Pricing. The danger is real enough that each of these people, and who is not of their number, will confront the concept of governmental limitation with the reality of the flagrant overstepping of actual law, and draw the obvious conclusion as to the status of his government with respect to. The danger is averted by the states propounding the doctrine that one agent must have the ultimate decision on technology, and that this agency, in the last analysis, must be part of the federal government. While the seeming independence of the federal judiciary has played a vital part in making its actions virtual threat to the bulk of the people, it is also and ever true that the judiciary is part and parcel of the government apparatus, and appointed by the executive and legislative branches. Black admits that this means the state has set itself up as a judge in, thus violating a basic theoretical principle for aiming at justice. It brusquely denies the possibility of any alternative. To Black, this solution, while paradoxical, is blithely evident. Final power of the state must stop where the law. Who shall set the limit, and who shall enforce stopping against the mightiest power? Why, the state itself, of course, though its judges and its law, controls the temperate, teaches the wise, and where the questions concern governmental power in a sovereign nation, it is not possible to select an umpire who is outside government. Every national government, so long as it is a government, must have the final say on its own. Black adds, the problem then is to devise such government of deciding as will hopefully reduce to a tolerable minimum intensity of the objection government judge in it. Having done this, you can only hope that this objection, though theoretically tenable, Alex mind, will practically lose enough of its force that the legitimating work of the deciding is acceptance. In the last analysis, Black finds the achievement of justice and legitimacy from the state's perpetual judging of its own as something of a miracle. Oh yeah. This ascription of the miraculous to government is reminiscent of James Burnham's Justice Government by mysticism and irrationality. In ancient times, before the illusions of science had corrupted wisdom, the founders of cities, gods or demons, neither the source nor the justification of can be put in rational terms. Why should I accept the hereditary or democratic or any other principle? Why should a principle justify the rule of that man over me? I accept the principle, well, because I do, because that's the way it is and has been. What if one does not accept the principle? What will the way be then? That is it. I like snark like that. Applying his thesis to the famous conflict between the Supreme Court and Professor Black keenly chides his fellow pro-New Deal colleagues for their short-sightedness in denouncing Reconstruction. The standard version of the story of the New Deal and the Court, though accurate in its way, displaces the emphasis. It concentrates on the difficulties, almost forgets how the whole thing turned. The upshot of the matter was, and this is what I like to emphasize, after some 24 months of the Supreme Court, without a single change in the of its composition, or indeed its actual manning, placed the affirmative stamp of legitimacy on the New Deal and on the whole new conception of government. That's rough, buddy. In this way, the Supreme Court was able to put the quietus on the large body of Americans strong constitutional objections to the bill. Of course, not everyone was satisfied. The Bonnie Prince Charlie of commanded laissez-faire, pierced the hearts of zealots in the islands. Alright, this is a continuation. But there is no longer any significant or dangerous public doubt as to the power of Congress, still as it does with the national economy. It had no means other than the Supreme Court for imparting as Black recognizes one major political theorist who recognized largely glaring loophole in a constitution on government. Right. Glaring loophole in a constitutional limit on government of placing the interpreting power in the Supreme Court was John C. Calhoun. Calhoun was not content with the miracle, but instead proceeded to a profound analysis of the problem. In his disquisition, Calhoun demonstrated the inherent tendency of the state to break through the limits of such a constitution. A written constitution certainly has many and considerable advantages. It is a great mistake to suppose that the assertion of provisions, strict and power of government, without investing those for whose protection they are inserted, great mistake to without investing those for whose protection they are inserted. They are inserted. Sufficient to prevent a major and dominant party from abusing powers. Being the party in possession of the government, they will, from the same constitution, and makes government necessary to protect society, be in favor of the powers granted by the Constitution and opposed to the restrictions. The minor or weaker party, on the contrary, take the opposite direction, regard them, the restrictions, as essential to their protection against the dominant. There are no means by which they could compel the major party to observe the restrictions. The only resort left them would be a strict construction of the Constitution. This, the major party would oppose a liberal. It would be construction against construction, one to contract and the other to enlarge powers of the government to the utmost. What possible avail could the strict construction of the minor party be against the liberal construction of the major, when the one would have all the power of the government to carry its construction into effect, the other would be deprived of all means of. In a contest so unequal, the result would not be doubtful. The party in favor of the restrictions was overpowered. The end of the contest would be a version of restrictions would ultimately be government be converted into one of unlimited power. One of the few political scientists who appreciated Calhoun's analysis, Professor J. Allen Smith, noted that the Constitution was designed with checks and balances to limit any one government power, and yet had then developed a Supreme Court with the monopoly of ultimate power. If the federal government was created to check invasions by the separate states, who was to check the federal power? Smith maintained that implicit in the check and balance idea of the Constitution was the concomitant view that no one branch of government may be the ultimate power of interpretation. It was assumed by the people that the new government could not be permitted within the limit. This would make it not the Constitution. The solution advanced by Calhoun, seconded in this century by such writers as was, of course, the famous doctrine of concurrent majority. If any substantial minority in the country, specifically a state government, believed that the federal government using its powers and encroaching on that minority would have the right to as a power as applied to state governments. This theory implied the right of nullification of a federal in a state's jurisdiction. In theory, the ensuing constitution would assure that the federal government check any state invasion of individual rights, while the states would check excessive federal power over the individual. And yet, while limitations would undoubtedly be more effective than at present, there are many difficulties and problems in if indeed a subordinate interest should rightfully have a veto over matters concerning it, why stop with the states? Why not place veto power in counties? Furthermore, interests are not only sectional, they're also occupational, social, etc. What of bakers or taxi drivers or any other occupation? They not be permitted a veto power over their own lives? This brings us to the important point that the simplification theory finds its check agencies of government itself. Let us not forget that federal and state governments and their respective branches of states are still guided by their own state interests rather than by the interests of private citizens. What is to prevent the Calhoun system from working in reverse, states tyrannizing over their citizens and only vetoing the federal government when it tries to stop that, or for states to acquiesce in federal tyranny? What is to prevent federal and state governments from forming profitable alliances, joint exploitation of citizenry? And even if the private occupational groups were to be given some form of functional, what is to prevent them from using the state to gain subsidies and other special privileges for themselves or from imposing cartels on their own members? In short, Calhoun does not push his path-breaking theory on concurrence far enough. He does not push it down to the individual himself. If the individual, after all, one whose rights are to be protected, a consistent theory of concurrence would imply veto power by every individual. That is, some form of unanimity principle. Calhoun wrote that Calhoun wrote that it should be impossible to put or to commit action without the concurrent consent. was perhaps unwittingly implying just such speculation begins to take us away from our subject, for down this path lie political could hardly be called states at all. One thing, just as the right of nullification from the state logically implies its right to succession, a right of individual nullification would imply the right of any seed from the state under which he based. We love individual secession. We like that. Thus, the state has invariably shown a striking talent, the expansion of its powers beyond any limits that might be imposed. Since the state necessarily lives by the compulsory confiscation of private capital, expansion necessarily involves the greater incursions of private individuals, and private entities must assert that the state is profoundly and inherently. In a sense, our position is the reverse of Marxist, that the state is the executive of the ruling class in the present day, supposedly the capitalist. Instead, the state, organization of the political institutes, and is the ruling class, rather ruling caste, and is in permanent opposition to genuinely private capital. We may therefore say with de Juvenal, only those who know nothing of any time but their own, who are completely in the dark as powers behaving through thousands of years, would regard these proceedings, nationalization, as the of a particular set of doctrines. They are, in fact, the normal manifestations of power, and differ not at all in their nature from Gates' confiscation of the monastery. The same principle at work, the hunger for authority, thirst for resources, and in all of these the same characteristics are present, including the rapid elevation of the dividers of the whether it is socialist or whether it is not. Power must always be at war with capitalist authorities and despoil the capitalists of their accumulation. In doing so, it obeys the law of its Juvenile. Woo! State fairs! Hopefully me. Probably not me. I'm like a... I am not a romantic. So I don't think it fairs me. Also not very compelling. Oh. I got distracted. Where's my voice? Brain is full of... Fog is coming. Oh, I love this song. What the state fears above all, any fundamental threat to it and its own existence. The death of the state came out in two major ways. A, through conquest by another state, or B, through revolutionary overthrow by its own subjects. In short, by war or war and revolution, as the two basic variably arouse in state rule their maximum propaganda among the people. As stated above, any way must always be used to mobilize the people to come to the state's defense in the belief that they are defending themselves. The fallacy of the idea becomes evident in description against those who refuse to defend them forced into the state's military. Needless to add, no defense is them against this act of their own. In war, state power is pushed to its ultimate end under the slogans of defense and urgency. It can impose a tyranny upon the public such as might be openly resisted in time of peace. War thus provides many benefits to it, and indeed every modern war has brought to warring people a legacy of increased state burdens upon society. War, moreover, provides to a state tempting opportunities for the of land areas over which it may exercise its monopoly of. Randolph Bourne was certainly correct when he wrote that health of any particular state a either health or grave injury. Seen that essential to the state is support by the intellect against their thus on the role of American Randolph Bourne, the war and the intellectual in the history of a radical. As Bourne states, a common device of intellect state actions channel any of basic state policy, and to discourage any fundamental total critique of this basic practice. You may test the hypothesis that the state is largely interested in itself rather than its subjects by asking, which category of crimes does the state pursue and punish most? Those against private citizens or those against itself? The gravest crimes in the state's lexicon are almost invariably not invasions of personal property, but dangers to its own content. For example, desertion of a soldier, failure to register draft, diversion and aggressive conspiracy, assassination of, and such economic crimes against the state as counterfeiting its money or evasion of it. Or compare the degree of zeal devoted to pursuing a man who assaults a policeman, the attention that the state pays the assault of it. Yet, curiously, states openly assign priority to defense against the public strikes few people as inconsistent with its raison d'etre. As Mencken puts it in inimitable fashion, this gang, Reuter's constitutional government, is well nigh immune to punishment. Worst extortions, even when they are private profit, carry no certainty our laws. The first days of the Republic, less than a few dozen of its have been impeached. A few trappers have ever been put in. The number of men sitting at Atlanta and revolting against the extortion is 10 times as great as the number of government officials condemned for oppressing the taxpayers' gain. A vivid and entertaining description of the lack of protection for individual provisions of his by his protectors, H. L. Mencken, The Nature of Prejudices, a Selection. Maybe. How states relate to one another. Bam, bam, bam. I don't know why the brain is filling handle wax. Since the territorial area of the Earth is divided among different states, interstate relations must occupy much of the state's time and energy. Natural tendency of a state is to expand its power. Externally, such expansion takes place by conquering area. Say territory is stateless or inhabited, any such expansion in different one set of state rulers and another. Only one set of rules obtain a monopoly of coercion to any given territorial area at any one time. Complete power over a territory by state X can only be obtained by the expulsion of state Y. Or, while risky, will be an ever-present, punctuated by periods of peace and by shifting alliances. We have seen that the internal or domestic attempt to limit the state in the 17th through 19th constitutionalism. Its external or foreign affairs counterpart was the development of national, especially such forms as the laws of rights. Parts of international law originally private, growing out of the need of merchants and traders everywhere to protect their property, indicate disputes. Examples are admiralty law and even the governmental voluntarily not imposed by any national state. The object of the laws of war was to limit state destruction, state apparatus itself, thereby preserving the civilian public from the slaughter and devastation of war. The object of the development of neutral rights was to preserve private civil national, even with enemy countries, from seizure by one of the overriding aim then extend and particularly its destructive impact on private citizens of the. This is to be distinguished from modern international law, stress on maximizing the extent of war, such concepts as jurist. You just made that up. Jurist. Person with expert knowledge of law. Law expert. Got it. The jurist F.J.P. Veal commonly describes such civilized warfare as it briefly flourished in 15th century. The rich burghers and merchants of medieval were too busy making money and enjoying life to undertake the hardships and dangers of. So they adopted the practice of hiring mercenaries to do their fighting, and, being thrifty, business-like folk, they dismissed their mercenaries immediately after their service could be dismissed. Wars were, therefore, fought by armies hired for campaign. First time, soldiering became a reasonable, comparatively harmless profession. Generals of that period maneuvered against each other, often with constant skill. One had won the advantage, the opponent generally either quitted or surrendered. It was a recognized rule that a town could only be sacked if it offered resistance. Unity could always be purchased by paying. As one natural consequence, no town ever being obvious that a government too weak to defend its citizens had forfeited their allegiance. Citizens had little to fear from the dangers of which were the concern only of professional soldiers. not bothering me. The well-nigh absolute separation of private civilian from the state war 18th century Europe is highlighted by even postal communications were successfully restricted for long in war. Letters circulated without censorship, a freedom that astonishes the 20th century. Subjects of two warring talked to each other if they met, and when they could not meet, corresponded not as enemies. The modern notion hardly exists. Subjects of any enemy are partly accountable for the acts of their rulers, nor had the warring rulers any firm disposition to stop communications with the subjects of the enemy. The old inquisitorial practices, espionage in connection with religious worship and caring, and no comparable connection with political or economic communications contemplated. Passports were originally created to provide safe conduct in during most of the 18th century. It seldom occurred to Europeans to abandon their travels in a foreign country their own was fighting. That's pretty funny. Okay, there's one on the list. War and human. And trade became increasingly recognized as beneficial to both parties. 18th century warfare also counterbalances the amount of trading with how far states have transcended rule as warfare in this century needs no elaboration here. In the modern era of total war, combined with the technology of destruction, the very idea of keeping war limited to state apparatus seems even more quaint and old than the original of the United States. When states are not at war, agreements are often necessary to keep. Let's skip this. One doctrine that has gained curiously wide acceptance: sanctity of treaties. This concept is treated as the counterpart of sanctity of a treaty and a genuine contract have nothing in common. Contract transfers in a precise manner titles to private property. The government does not in any proper sense own a territorial area. Any agreements that it not confer titles to property. If, for example, Mr. Jones sells or gives land to Smith, Jones's heir cannot legitimately transcend upon Smith's heir, claim the land rightfully. Property title has already transferred. Old Jones's contract is automatically binding upon young Jones. Former had already transferred the property. Young Jones therefore has no property. Oh, yo, we got a raid. I'm near the end of this book. Thank you, Ellie the Wolfie, for the raid. We are reading Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. Hello. I'm at page 52, which is quite near the end. I'm going to be playing some Daggerfall. I'm like a good ways through that. We're in the chapter How States Relate to One Another. It's quite dry, but, you know, almost over. But if, at a certain date, the government of, say, Ruritania is coerced or even bribed by the government of Moldavia into giving up some of its territory, it is absurd to claim that the governments inhabitants of the two countries are forever barred from a claim the reunification of Ruritania on the grounds of the sanctity of... Well, I hope you make a good lunch. Yeah, lunch, I assume it's like early morning there. Maybe British, I don't know. A lot of British people wake up and like catch the stream, even though I'm on the other side of the world. Nighttime here. Neither the people nor the land of West Ruritania are owned by either of the government. Lunchtime in France. Oh yeah, nice. As a corollary, one government can certainly not bind by the dead hand of the past a later government treaty. A revolutionary government overthrew the king of Ruritania could, similarly, hardly be called to account for the king's actions, for a government is not, as is a child, a true heir to its predecessor. Very weird note to end this chapter on. And this is the last chapter and it's quite short. History as a race between state power and social power. Just as the two basic and mutual in cooperation, coercive exploitation, production, predation, so the history of mankind, particularly its economic history, may be considered as a contest between, on the one hand, there is creative product change and cooperation. On the other, coercive dictation and predation over those social relations. Albert J. Nock happily termed the leading force social power and state power. That's a fun title. Albert J. Nock, Our Enemy the State. That sounds... That's on the list. I'm making a list of things to read, and it keeps getting longer. Actually, it's not terribly long. The way the footnotes were handled in the book I read were quite long. But, there's a lot of things to look at to read. All dry and economic. Social power is man's power over nature, is cooperative transformation of nature's and insight into nature's cooperative transformation of nature's resources, nation into nature, for the benefit of all participating individuals. Social power is the power over nature, living standards achieved by men. State power, as we have seen, coercive and parasitic seizure of this production, a draining of the fruits of society for the benefit of non-productive, actually anti-productive. While social power is over nature, state power is power over man. Through history, man's productive and creative forces have, time and again, carved out new ways of transforming nature for man's benefit. These have been the times when social power has skirted ahead of state power. The degree of state encroachment in society has considered, but always after a greater or smaller time lag, the state has moved into these areas, cripple and confiscate social power once more. If the 17th through 19th century were, in many countries of the West, times of accelerating social power and a corollary increase in freedom, the 20th century has been primarily an age in which state power has been catching up, a consequent reversion to slavery, war, and destruction. In this century, the human race faces once again the virulent reign of the state now armed with the man's creator. confiscated and perverted to its own aims. The last few centuries, times when men tried to place constitutional and other limits on, only to find that such limits, as with all other attempts, have failed. Of all the numerous forms that governments have taken over the centuries, of all the concepts and institutions that have been tried, none has succeeded in state in check. The problem of the state is evidently as far from these. Perhaps new paths of inquiry must be explored. If the successful final solution of the state question could be attained. That's the end. Although parasitic process of catching up has been almost openly claimed by Karl Marx, that socialism must be established of capital accumulation. And certainly one indispensable ingredient of such a solution must be the sundering of the alliance of lands, the creation of centers of inquiry and education, which will be independent of state power. Christopher Dawson notes that the great intellectual movements of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment were achieved by working outside of, and sometimes branched universities. These academia of the new ideas were established by independent crisis of Western education. That's the book. Most of you won't have the entire thing. Not many of you anyway. And we're going to the other game. I need to switch over the thing. Gotta do a quick minute for housekeeping on my end. I love that. Setting the category, so if you get like tag full time. Might not be some people's speed. That's Daggerfall. Oh man, out of my room. The gaming full screen. There we go. Why isn't it? Okay. Okay, let's play. I delivered the unicorn horn to Rennie. Right? And I have a note. I just gotta get this book identified, but Pretty close. I'm going to letter from the Queen of Sentinel for the end of the next season. See the which is over here. Hi ship. I'm gonna stay the night if just gotta loiter outside the gate and get attacked by bandits randomly. Damn, this one's tough. Adamant Wakazashi, that's very nice. Okay. I'm gonna go to the Beach Guild. Oh, and actually I should go by this tavern here. Wait a couple hours. I want to go to the Mage Guild, but I didn't buy the shirt I've got. I think it'll be quite good. I have a suspicion that I want the shirt. And it's gonna give me like a... One can hope. Hey, my werewolf hunting money. Actually... They're really the same. Okay, well... I don't care about the... Rest for another hour. Damn it. Cops. Five votes, Popo. I don't know why the cops don't like me here, but it's very easy to just... And so I will. But it just occurs to me, Huh. Do there. I don't know that will happen. Fascinating. I didn't know about that button. Mages Guild. Might identify some stuff. Walking. Iron Will, actually, that's quite good. I'm gonna go to Iron Will. What does that do? Fortify willpower. Not bad, but I'm gonna go back to the queen. Hopefully the guards don't try and. Back of the hole. Huh? There we go. Very convoluted way of getting to the. Oh, no way. Hilla Fenrickson. Welcome to Sentinel. I trust you have had a comfortable stay so far. Let me get right to the point. My son, Prince Lotan, you are well respected and trusted North. I have need of your sort. I am willing to pay 829 to infiltrate Castle Wayrest and recover an heirloom of the sand. Yes. What bounty? There is an item, painting, hidden somewhere within Castle Wayrest. I desire this item for reasons you worry about. Bring it to me and I will pay your 829. No time limit either. Painting in there somewhere. Goes to a. Don't think I'm in trouble with the police. I could be wrong. Give me grief. That's my one. I've got a good one on. Dwarven stuff's always. I can't do any of it. I'm fully unarmed. I don't have a time on this. What if I just... Oh, yo, it's Baronzia. Barenzia? This less. And also... I gotta... Virus. You're trying to track down that letter of the Emperor. There are very few scandals in the Bay which I am totally ignorant. I could give you some price. That I know. A champion doesn't fear the fire of oblivion. Are you interested? By the Black Isle, that is a relief. Do not ask any questions. Get this letter to a certain high-level source at the Necromancer's Crypt, Scourge Barrow, Dragontail Mountains. Avoid the rift if you forget you have gone too far. They will not be expecting you. Not wait for any. Necromancers feel that death is a reward for the living, not a punishment. Once you have delivered the letter, they would feel no need to guarantee your... I need the letter delivered and response from King of Worms in my hand 1 month from now at... Agree to your terms, I will give you my first whole child. Only you can his dead son. That he would even marry Nilfgaard. There's Scourge Bearer. Yes, Fly ship recklessly. I think I remember the way through there. I could be wrong. I didn't take that path. Ooh. Oh, yeah. Bats. I haven't fought bats in a while. Bison. Glitch. Very good. If you're not rewarded with death by the loyal servants of the Barrow, please give this note to... Gotta remember the way through from the time I cleared playthrough. I'm out. Up and out. That was very, very quick in and out. Why is it a... load. I'm not taking a low stat boost. Damn it. Give me the number 6. Five, that's the first one. 5. I'm not taking 5. I feel like it's always for. Six. And let's put these all into 5-minute agility. Copy. Store. Also generals. That is kind of. Rest. Your vision hazes and the world grows dim. Out of the grey, a woman's face appeared. Killer, your efforts to free me covered a powder that will ghost my beloved Lysander. However, it is in the hands of Gortwar, all over the citadel of Orsinium. Go to him in Orsinium, and anything that can be done to persuade him to give it to you. Bring the powder to me. Once you. Vision clears. Sometimes you wish sorceresses would just send. Enemies. Dang. Not a great strategy. Get a nice 8 hours sleep, that's ideal. I like chopping. Better stuff. Face is getting numb. It's done. I'll be queen of the first hall, though I'm sure the engagement will be quite lengthy. I promised you information about the Emperor. The letter you seek is in the hands of all of the orc. Put it from the field of daggers in numbers. I confess, I don't know why the Emperor sent it. The girl is innocent to a fault, and everyone knows that Gothred, real empire, that Cody, Lysander was. Of course, my own family. Enough of the boring court. If you really want to find this letter, get in good with Terra, Daggerfall, Queen Mother to. I wouldn't direct. Start with some. And this is a normal cloth amulet. Let's stop at the bank because I'm getting a bit heavy on gold. Because that's like. I've got 48 kgs of gold on me. I've got more than 40. More than I had before. 49 kgs. 49 kgs worth of gold. That's too much gold. You hate to say it. Love to see it, hate to say it. Fighters Guild. No, there's a bank up here. Banking. Deposit. 15,000. Between the places, actually, I can afford a boat. I don't want a boat, but I could afford one. Save as healer 60. Go to Sinium. Lord of the Orcs City. And I think Ray Tree's gonna. Hey. Chris. Can't ask out. Back to deck. Oh, good. Yeah, I just got Queen King Edward and Florencia, sovereign of the proud to announce the engagement of Gaia, Wayrus to Caradul, first whole Isle of Summer. That's it. Yeah. Back up to the I don't know, I'm gonna the princess. I'm gonna get back in with these guys. Go to the market, see if there's any place to look. Man, Daggerfall is such a pretty place. Maybe about the killer ghost. Elven boots. Bank. Where's the bank? Prices. The blade shop. Blade shops don't have a lot for armor, but they have some. Where's right at the top? Orcish Wakazat. Yeah, I don't wield weapons. there is a goblin. That's not the appointment. Brokers don't have Daedric. I was gonna say they don't really have stuff, but like right off the bat, I mean. Oh, no armor. I want armor. Fail's quite tempting, but I can't, can't wield it. My cousin, Mortister Kinging, has appealed to me for aid in a rather distasteful situation. It appears that there is a temple of some variety being consecrated. That's the proper phrase for the disgusting activity. Well, obviously we need to crush it while I am willing to go as high as 954 gold. I count on your help. Thank you in advance for this. What I think would be the best use of abilities is to create ruins of Morford Manor to eliminate the so-called shaman of the temple. If we can kill it before our assault in 4 days, that would make the job much easier. Done. Report to my cousin's palace in Rickmore. He's the one who's going to pay you for all this. Huzzah! Now what I do, log. Yeah. This dungeon and then go to sleep. For the night. Pumps. How do I get in? Folks, help me. Hold on. Like, before art the. Oh, here it is. All camouflaged. Run around until I find the of these goop. I find this cave pattern very relaxing. I get so many potions. Up here. Ooh, an enchanted long. Actually, quite good. Poisoned. Scared. I'm not finding. Am I in the right place? Altered mana. Hmm. Uh, straight past the straightforward. Hmm. Am I poisoned again? Bash the door down. Loot's nice. Very lame did end. Hmm. Strange. I like to think the answer is what a maze for, but it's really impossible to tell without um hearing something. Okay. My blade. This. Are there any orcs in this? To find a single orc. I don't want to. So uncash money. Right answer was the that. Dragon. Yeah, we're doing numbers. Go 21 to armor. Oh man, if I could get the rest of this in Dwarven, I would be that one variation of Scipio. Why is it always the right armor? Also, hell yeah, Dwarven. Daedric, bright red, 21 armor on one piece. I've killed Bjork Shaman. That is all I needed. But still. Heck this. Okay, that's nutty. Straight from Elven to Daedric. And that is the look. I'm so glad I'm dungeon. I'm gonna rip more. Switched into the zombies decaying flesh. You see the Gilla Fenrickson in on I'm never sure how to pronounce this word. Okay.
Domain.
Okay. It's just the main. Main at your convenience. I have a small matter that you are ideally suited. As always, my servants will test your mettle. Feel free to dispense with them. They can always be raised again. The King of Worms, Master of Scourge Barrow. Why are my spell points? I need to... Rip more. Oh, the poison was stopping my ability to... Oh, it's that. Got it. But this is where I fought the vamp... No, the werewolf. I gotta keep my eyes out for vibrant colors. Multi Smithy and Shield. the main market area. Trash. Home. Hellos, Hellos, I mean castle? Hellos, I mean... Two. Finish off the day. See you guys. Fun. My headache's coming back, but hopefully... I'm not streaming tomorrow. That was the stream.